The night Hannah Caldwell decided she needed a husband by tomorrow, the sky above Cedar Grove, Ohio, was cracking open with thunder. Rain pounded against the windshield of her aging sedan as she sat in the parking lot of St. Mark's Community Center, hands trembling over the steering wheel. Inside that building, her entire future was hanging by a thread. If she didn't solve the problem before sunrise, she would lose the foster child who had become her whole world. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that change ordinary lives, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that hope can appear when we least expect it. Hannah had never planned her life to look like this. At 32, she had imagined a modest home, a loving husband, and children laughing in the backyard. Instead, she lived in a small rented duplex on the edge of town and worked double shifts as a nurse at Mercy General Hospital. Love had come once, years ago, but it ended in betrayal that left her cautious and fiercely independent. She told herself she didn't need anyone. Until now. 3 months earlier, a shy 8-year-old girl named Sophie had entered her life. Sophie had large hazel eyes and a habit of clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit whenever she felt uncertain. She had been moved through 3 foster homes in 2 years. Hannah had taken her in temporarily, planning only to help for a few weeks, but somewhere between homework at the kitchen table and bedtime stories under soft lamplight, something shifted. Sophie began calling her Miss Hannah in a voice that carried both hope and fear. Hannah began rearranging her entire world around that small, fragile smile. Then came the letter. The adoption board informed her that, while she was an excellent candidate, single applicants were facing stricter evaluations due to new state guidelines. Married couples were being prioritized. If Hannah wanted permanent guardianship, having a stable partner would significantly strengthen her case. The final review meeting was in less than 24 hours. She had laughed at first, a hollow, disbelieving sound. A husband by tomorrow? It was absurd. Life wasn't a fairy tale. But as she watched Sophie coloring quietly at the kitchen counter that evening, humming to herself in a way that sounded like she was trying to fill empty spaces, Hannah felt something fierce awaken inside her. She would not let this child be uprooted again. That was how she found herself at the community center, where a late-night fundraiser for foster families was underway. She had volunteered earlier in the evening, serving coffee and organizing paperwork, but her mind was racing the entire time. She needed help. She needed someone willing to stand beside her, even if only long enough to prove stability to the board. Across the hall, near the refreshment table, stood a man she recognized vaguely from church. His name was Caleb Morrison. He was in his late 30s, tall, with tired eyes that suggested both grief and resilience. He was a single father raising a 10-year-old son named Owen after losing his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. Hannah had seen him sit alone during services, his son leaning against him, both of them quiet but attentive. Caleb understood responsibility, he understood loss, and most importantly, he understood what it meant to fight for a child. The idea felt reckless, almost humiliating, but desperation has a way of stripping pride. She crossed the hall, heart pounding louder than the storm outside. When he turned and met her gaze, there was a gentleness in his expression that nearly broke her resolve. She didn't ease into the conversation. Words spilled out in a rush, breathless and raw. She told him about Sophie, about the letter, about the meeting at 9 in the morning. And then, with a steadiness that surprised even herself, she said she needed a husband by tomorrow. Caleb didn't laugh. He didn't step back in alarm. He simply listened. For a long moment, the room seemed to blur around them. The fundraiser noise faded into the background. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. Hannah felt exposed, foolish, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. She expected rejection, perhaps polite sympathy. Instead, Caleb asked a question that changed everything. He asked if she loved a little girl. The simplicity of it stunned her. She nodded, unable to speak. He studied her face carefully, as if measuring sincerity, fear, and hope all at once. Then he told her something unexpected. He said he had been praying for a way to expand his own small, broken family. His son had grown quieter over the years, carrying grief too heavy for a child. Caleb had considered fostering but feared he didn't have enough emotional strength left to open his heart again. Yet watching Hannah volunteer over the past months, seeing her patience and warmth, he had often wondered what it would be like to build something new, not out of romance, but out of purpose. His reply wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a sweeping declaration. It was calm and steady. He said if this was about giving two children stability, he would stand beside her in the morning. Not as a lie, not as a performance, but as a commitment to explore whether two wounded families could become one. Hannah felt the air leave her lungs. She had expected shock. Instead, she found partnership. That night, they talked for hours in the emptying hall. They didn't pretend to be in love. They didn't craft a fantasy. They spoke honestly about fear, about grief, about the terrifying responsibility of shaping young lives. Caleb admitted he still missed his wife every day. Hannah admitted she was afraid of trusting again. But beneath their confessions was something solid, shared devotion to children who deserved more than instability. By midnight, a plan had formed. They would present themselves, not as a spontaneous romance, but as two adults who had been building a partnership intentionally, grounded in community and faith. The board didn't require a wedding certificate by morning, only proof of a committed household. Caleb offered to bring Owen to the meeting to show unity. It would not be deception, it would be a declaration of intent. When Hannah returned home, Sophie was asleep on the couch, rabbit tucked beneath her chin. Hannah knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The fear that had consumed her earlier had softened into cautious hope. Morning arrived too quickly. The adoption boardroom felt sterile and intimidating. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Papers were stacked neatly on a long oak table. Hannah's palms were damp as she sat beside Caleb, who radiated a quiet steadiness. Owen sat on his other side, posture straight, eyes serious. When the questions began, they answered with honesty. They spoke about shared values, about conversations regarding parenting styles, about church community support. Caleb described watching Hannah care for Sophie at volunteer events, noting her patience and natural warmth. Hannah described observing Caleb's devotion to his son, the way he knelt to listen when Owen spoke. At one point, Sophie was invited in. She hesitated at the doorway until she saw Hannah and Caleb sitting together. Something shifted in her expression, less uncertainty, more trust. She walked forward and, without prompting, took Owen's hand. The small gesture stunned everyone in the room. Children, unburdened by adult calculations, often sense safety before we do. The meeting ended with polite nods and promises of a decision by afternoon. The waiting was unbearable. They sat on a wooden bench outside the building, the sun now shining brightly as if mocking the storm from the night before. Hannah realized then that something profound had already changed. Even if the board rejected her, she was no longer alone in the fight. Caleb wasn't a stranger anymore. He was someone who had chosen courage alongside her. Hours later, the call came. Approval. Not because of paperwork perfection, but because the board believed Sophie would thrive in a household built on intentional partnership and community support. The commitment they demonstrated mattered more than a rushed marriage certificate. Hannah broke down in tears right there on the sidewalk. Sophie wrapped her small arms around her waist. Caleb placed a steady hand on her shoulder, and Owen smiled for the first time that day. But the real miracle wasn't just the approval. It was what followed. Weeks turned into months. What began as a practical alliance slowly deepened into something warmer. Shared school drop-offs became shared dinners. Laughter returned to Caleb's home in ways he hadn't thought possible. Hannah found herself trusting again, not in fairy tale perfection, but in steady presence. The children bonded first, their friendship weaving the adults closer together. Love didn't explode into existence. It grew quietly, like roots strengthening beneath the soil. One evening, nearly a year after that stormy night, Caleb proposed not out of obligation but out of genuine devotion. He did it in the same community center parking lot where everything had begun. This time, the sky was clear. Hannah realized she hadn't needed a husband by tomorrow. She had needed someone brave enough to say yes to building something real. Before we close this story, if it touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to comment "second chances are real" below. Your words might encourage someone else who is fighting quietly for their own miracle. Their wedding was small, held in a modest chapel in Cedar Grove. Sophie scattered petals down the aisle, grinning with a confidence she never had before. Owen stood tall beside his father. It wasn't a rescue story. It wasn't a fairy tale rushed by desperation. It was a testament to what happens when two people choose purpose over fear. If this story moved you, if you felt the power of kindness and the beauty of second chances, please like, share, and engage with this video. Your support helps spread stories that remind the world that even impossible deadlines can lead to unexpected blessings. Because sometimes, when someone says they need a miracle by tomorrow, what they truly need is someone willing to stand beside them today.